Hey y'all, I'm Dan, and this is Kinfolk, Stories of Community and Connection. In today's episode, we're chatting with Gretch, the owner of Artefaktual Comics and the self-proclaimed menace of Barbour County. We dive into her journey running a comic shop, explore the mystery of the Philippi Mummies, and discuss comic culture in Appalachia. Let's dive in. Good morning, Gretch. Welcome to Kinfolk, Stories of Community and Connection. I'm so glad that you're here. Thanks for coming in.
Hi.
Last time I believe that I saw you was maybe like 1 to 2 years ago, and it
Mm-hmm.
was at the old location, and
Mm-hmm.
you have moved or in the process of still moving.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have a new space. I got it in April. It needs extensive repairs. And not being open, I'm not making the money to make the repairs. So it's been very slow going. I've had a lot of eager volunteers, but they only get so far when I don't have the money to, and everything costs $1,000.
So are you set up like are you I guess like are you open so that people are able to come in and shop, or is it more like are you virtually?
They can't really shop. I don't stop them from shopping. It's not a pleasant shopping experience. Because we're always in there doing something. It's more like it's a warehouse for my stuff.
Okay.
I greatly prefer if people just ordered stuff off the website and scheduled a pickup so that I know you're coming, because there's always something all over the floor. Like there's like just like piles of magic cards all over the floor, or I'm re-alphabetizing the books and they're all over the floor. And at the end of the building is Mountain State Quilting. That's owned by Mark Tenney. He's an amazing guy. Um, as soon as I moved into the space, he was like, "Do you want these bookshelves? I need them out of my
Yes.
airspace ASAP." And I was like, "Free bookshelves, yes." So they filled my office. They're getting my office nice and organized. He had a bunch of other fixtures he was getting rid of, which is kind of like changed my concept of how the store is going to look.
Hmm.
Because I'm like, oh well, but this is a nice fixture that I never thought I could get something like this, and this is like $1,000 retail fixture, and he's
Uh-huh.
just like putting it on the curb. And the lady in between us, Nina, owns Bless This Food Pantry,
Okay.
and she's doing great work. She's incredibly generous.
Could you give me the lore? How did Artefactual come to be?
Literally, I needed a name that was guaranteed to be available on any current and future social media channels. And I think I just kind of started like going through the dictionary.
Hmm.
So I didn't take long. Artifact is it's things that are man-made.
Hmm.
And at the time, I never intended to open a comic shop. But I did make jewelry. I made jewelry out of comic books mostly. And so I was coming up with a name, and I liked Artefactual. And then I was like, but it didn't feel safe enough. So what I did was I made a portmanteau out of the Polish spelling, because I'm Polish American. The Polish spelling of artifact with the K, and then added the English version of the adjectival form, because there's not an adjectival form in Polish. And then I was like, there we go. Nobody else is spelling this shit. And so I was making jewelry when I worked for Diamond Comic Distributors, and that was great because I got a bunch of free comics for my jewelry. And then I left Diamond and I moved to Minneapolis, and I did some freelance comic book editing, and then I moved back to West Virginia. Um, my family needed me here.
Hmm.
And when we lived in Minneapolis, a lot of people were like, oh my God, you should open a comic shop. And I'm like, Minneapolis doesn't need another comic shop. They have plenty of them. I just being good at something doesn't mean that your business is necessary here. And if I opened one anywhere, I'd open one in Philippi. Why? Because they have nothing. Uh, and so then I did that. Um, no regrets. Few tiny regrets.
So since being there, and this is kind of a me thing, I don't know if it's kind of the same for you or any, if you know any similar stories, but I didn't really see, I can remember thinking back, I didn't really see my first comic. Like there were no, at least where I grew up in Clendenin, there was no place that I could go to buy a comic or
Mm-hmm.
be exposed to one except for the library. And that was even extremely limited, with what they carried. So I guess like since, putting your roots down where you're at now, how do you feel that, I guess like the exposure, versus before to now?
So I remember growing up, uh, we had the Foodland had maybe like the occasional Batman Wonder Woman comic book. I never picked them up because I was always picking up Barbie Bazaar. Because at the end of the day, I'm a toy guy. I don't even like comic books. 9 times out of 10, I like my comics interests are very niche. I don't like superheroes. I feel held hostage every time I have to watch some new Marvel production because I'm like, I feel like I have to watch it. I have to know what's going on because somebody's going to want to talk to me about it, but I don't care anymore. Once we hit a decade of Marvel movies, I was like, guys, we did it. We're done.
Time to cut it off.
Yeah, we got go on a hiatus or something. Let it breathe. Go read the comic books. Go read those.
Is that like the not the demographics, but like is that like the what is the wants? Like what are people around Philippi? What are they, how do you curate your selection?
Seriously, I'm very worried about a lot of these kids. I can see in real time that they genuinely cannot read. If they gravitate towards anything with pages, it's a manga, and I think that's literally because they've seen the anime or they've heard somebody talking about the anime, so they recognize that much. But as far as being able to actually sit down and both have the attention span and the reading skills to read a book, they can't do it. I'm watching these kids come into the shop and use speech to text for everything. And the person on the other end, whether it's like a friend or a parent, they have no idea that this kid can't spell or read to save their lives.
It's concerning.
Yeah, so I don't know how I'm supposed to market reading books to a whole generation of kids who literally can't read. And when you look at like the current adult literacy levels, just in the US alone is abysmal. So I can only imagine it's about 5 times worse in West Virginia right now. And it always has been. So I think that's one of the issues that has made us kind of isolated to comic books is because we're talking about reading as a hobby. And but the flip side of that is comic books are genuinely the best literacy development tool. It breaks up the words so it's less overwhelming. It teaches you more effective vocabulary because comic books have to be more stringent in the words that they use. And it's also teaching art appreciation because you have to interpret the art panels. You're learning nonverbal communication because you're looking at the gestures and the facial expressions. There's this concept of when a person is reading a prose book, if there's some timed event like a chase scene or something, your brain feels compelled to read faster if the
Hmm.
scene is faster. And when you can't read fast enough to keep up with the pace of that story, you get overwhelmed, you put the book down. With a comic book, because there's so much additional visual input,
Yeah.
you're it's the speed of what you're reading is kind of matched to the pace of how quickly you can read. So if you're reading 3 pages of story and it's like a car chase, but it takes you 15 minutes to read those pages, well, in your head, that was a 15-minute car chase. If it takes 3 minutes, that was just a quick cutscene. And so your brain feels less overwhelmed and you're more likely to stick with reading the comic book, which is
Hmm.
why I get really frustrated when even like in the year of 2024 to still hear teachers say, when are you going to read a real book? Ugh, these kids only want to read comic books. I have a niece and she's dyslexic. And so she's really struggled with reading,
Hmm.
but she picked up like The Great Gatsby as a comic book and just kind of flew through it.
So how, with that being, I feel like I've kind of seen reading as a hobby, not that people don't do it anymore, but I guess how do you feel, how do you contribute, how do you encourage, younger readers like that? How do you, steer them to a comic book? Or like, if you see someone younger walk into the store, do you engage them and try to, push them for a comic or?
I do. I don't push them too hard because I also feel like the younger generations are um never in the ways that matter, but more resistant to a lot of types of social pressure.
Yeah.
So they're more resistant to marketing a lot. Or just being convinced of doing something because somebody else does something. So I give gentle nudges to like, if you have any questions, I am here and I will be here. And I just kind of leave it at that. And mostly they come in for the tchotchkes, the art supplies, and the cards. Um, Occasionally I can get through to a kid by making the argument like, if you could read better, you would actually understand the mechanics on some of those cards, and then maybe your friends wouldn't beat your ass 24/7 if you actually knew what you were playing. Just saying. And they're like, oh, that makes sense.
A question that just popped in my head as I was just kind of listening. With you owning a comic book shop, are there any, I don't guess I've really thought about it much. Are there any local, be it West Virginia or, the Appalachian region, are there any local, like, comic creators or comic artists? I'm not sure what the term is, but.
Well, it depends. Are they an artist? Are they a writer? Um, the I'm trying to think. None that come to mind. There's indie artists abound, but nobody, no regularly published creator that I can think of off the dome.
Okay.
Unless you count the McElroy brothers, because they do have a comic book.
So McElroy Brothers is.
They're podcasters. They're from Huntington.
Really? Okay.
They're pretty big in the nerd realm. They have, so their main podcast is My Brother, and Me. And that's just kind of them being doofuses. Um,
I'm going to have to check them out.
and then they have another one, The Adventure Zone, which is them and their dad playing campaigns together. That one's really funny.
I've heard about this. Okay. I've heard
Yes.
about it loosely. It's coming to mind now.
And they're pretty big on YouTube.
Okay. I'm going to look into that. That actually sounds really neat. Are you familiar with the term menace of Barbour County?
Yeah, that's me. I've planned a pretty full schedule for the month of November. And one of the things is going to be a pop culture swap meet. So people can come bring in like a box, one box of
One
stuff
box.
that they're willing to either buy, sell, or trade to other people. I'm doing something every Saturday. I'm going to start up a chapter of the Girls Only Comic Book Club here.
Love it.
I've wanted to do it for a really long time, but so one of my first barriers with even having a comic shop in Philippi is so many people in West Virginia in general have never been exposed to a comic shop. Literally all they have to go on is Big Bang Theory. Or just some other nerd trope of like, well, that sounds unpleasant to me and I don't ever want to go in there if I'm just going to be met with the comic book guy. We're going to try to bring back D&D. We lost our DM. So trying to figure out how to move forward with a new campaign strategy for that. And then I'm going to bring back something I did when I worked at the libraries, which was called Tech Tuesdays, where I basically teach old people how to use their phones.
That's cool.
But some of this stuff, like if it was about Facebook, it was about Facebook for businesses and organizations and how to leverage it as a marketing tool. The first class I'm going to do on the 12th is going to be on AI, because old people keep bugging me about that. Like, what are the, popular and emerging AI tools that are coming out right now? And do you even need them? 9 times out of 10, you don't. And then Saturdays. So the first Saturday of the month, I'm going to do, and this is going to be for every month, I'm going to have open art. I used to call it art therapy. I think a lot of people were turned off by the therapy aspect. And I'm like, that's not, this isn't. I even had a couple phone calls that were like, are you a licensed therapist? I have a court order. And I'm like, no. None
of that.
But just make it like an open art where people can come play with the art supplies that we have. They can bring in a project that maybe they've been meaning to finish and haven't made the time for, and maybe a little parallel play will motivate them to finally finishing their project. Or they want to do something and they just want to bounce an idea off somebody so they can come bring their art projects in and work on them in the shop. So the second Saturdays is Puzzle Club. Third Saturdays is going to be the Pop Swap. And then fourth Saturday is, I think I called it open play for now. I don't know quite how to describe it effectively yet, but it's going to be, you can come play with your art supplies. You can come play with board games. We also have some old TVs and a GameCube up there.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I also have the Apple TV hooked up to my TV, so you can play games on the Apple TV. And I've got the PlayStation controllers connected to the Apple TV, so you can come play video games. You could draw, just hang out, do whatever. It's sky's the limit on the last Saturday of the month. And then because there's 5 weeks in November, this month the last Saturday is going to be Friendsgiving.
Oh, that'll be awesome.
So I'm planning a big event in January.
Okay.
Kind of risky. I'm going to do a sci-fi fantasy con.
Okay.
I'm probably going to have more information coming out about it later this week. So you're the first person who officially gets to hear about it, other than the workshopping we've been doing in the Discord.
I feel honored.
And I'm probably going to have to make a separate Discord just to keep from bothering the other 80 people in the Discord who don't want to hear about this shit 24/7. So the plan is, if you've never been up to AB, the building that was their cafeteria and student center, I'm going to be renting out that whole building. So the cafeteria is going to be the vendor room. There's a couple of like side meeting rooms throughout. So I'm going to have panels upstairs and downstairs. The old bookstore that was downstairs is going to be turned into a kid zone. So I want to make it very family friendly. And I know that part of that is knowing that sometimes you need to pull your kids away from the chaos for a little bit. So having them in a sequestered area where, families can just come and go freely, and there's going to be a separate schedule of events just for the kids, of like crafts and activities that they can just drop in and do, or sitting in a corner and like decompressing.
Yeah.
I'm going to be sure to have a quiet room, and I want to focus this first show on building those communities rather than having a bunch of creators, because my budget is $0. So focus on getting really good artists and vendors, and I'm gonna have some really cool panels. Some of the ones that we already have scheduled are, I'm doing one on AI in publishing, and well, not necessarily publishing, but just kind of like in freelance work in general, and like have a panel of the pros and cons in the middle. So I'm going to moderate that. And if somebody has really strong feelings and can craft a really good argument, I would love to talk to that person. If they're down to be in Philippi in January. Because I do want it, I want it to be very informative, and I want people to have, a full picture of what AI is doing to all of the creative industry. Mm-hmm. So we're going to have a cosplay 101. We're going to have a like D&D 101 and like learning how to DM, because that's half the battle, is finding somebody to make your campaign. I'm trying to get people together for like a cryptid sightings in West Virginia. So I would love to find some people who have seen cryptids and can tell a good story about that. I'm going to have a Filk circle that's going to be running the entire day. So for those who don't know, Filk is folk music that's based on sci-fi and fantasy. Usually it's based on like, you take a popular song that already exists and you just kind of make your Weird Al Filk parody on top of it. But sometimes it's original songs, and it's that kind of, for people who like going to the Augusta Festival or the writers groups, I think this is a really good transition into the fandom aspect of that kind of creativity. Mm-hmm. And I have some people who are like really eager to, they're like, absolutely, I will run the Filk circle. Can I dress as Barbarella while I do it? Yes, you can. You might be cold, but you can. And just really starting to create some of those communities that West Virginia has been lacking. Mm-hmm. What I've seen of a lot of the shows in West Virginia has been very disappointing to me, because again, I've been outside of here and I've seen what we could have compared to what's being offered to West Virginians. And it almost feels cruel sometimes that, you'll have this, a comic show, but it's not really a convention. It's more of an expo, and it's just a place where you just stand around and buy stuff. And yes, it's great to support local artists and businesses and buy stuff, but it's also important that like you're making connections, because some of these people, and especially older people, like the amount of people that have come into the shop over the years and just have like quietly expressed their interest in something as if it's like this dark, embarrassing secret. And it's like, you like D&D? Everyone likes D&D. Do you not have YouTube? Stranger Things came out and D&D is to the moon. That's not weird. And I had no idea. It was a deep, dark shame in the 70s. Like,
for real.
Not for my dad, but for a lot of people. um, whole business is a giant collection of special interests. I and if you can't handle somebody like that, and I don't even like to use the word handle because I don't feel like I have to manage these people at all, and it makes me like so angry when somebody expresses their excitement and joy over something in a space that I made specifically so they could feel that way because the whole world sucks. And they so quickly try to stamp out their own joy because they've been told so many times that they're annoying or they're weird, and nobody wants to hear that shit. I do. I do. I will not learn the mechanics of magic cards, but you can tell me until my ears fall off how excited you are about this deck you're building. And I will occasionally throw out a phrase that will make it sound like I know what you're talking about. I do not, but that's okay. Because I am not here to stamp out anybody's joy. Unless you get joy out of thinking you will have a satisfactory conversation with me about excluding people from these industries, or flipping shit on eBay. Those are the two things I don't tolerate. If you say something like, there's too many queer characters in comic books, we're done. There's too many women we're done.
So if you do want to just give us the who's your mummy?
So Graham Hamrick was a farmer and a local undertaker. And one of the really important things to consider in this whole story is this is happening right after the Civil War. So you have a massive death toll, and you have people domestically dying further away from home than they ever had before. And we don't have cars, we don't have planes, we barely had a railway system. And so we have a lot of stinking, rotting bodies trying to come home on the railway system. And I mean, this is why we have mass graves sometimes, because it just wasn't feasible to send every individual soldier, also to be able to identify every individual soldier that died on the battlefield, to send them home. So, and before that time, people weren't really going that far outside of their communities. And when you died at home. Your funeral was in your living room. You were buried the same day because you're going to get stinky. They didn't have effective embalming processes, not ones that didn't involve arsenic, at least. So you have an undertaker who's looking for a more effective embalming strategy. A lot of the myth around Graham Hamrick is that his process and why the mummies are in such good shape is because he had this mysterious formula that he never told anybody what it was. And I don't know how true it is, but there is like a common story that at one point, while he was still alive, the Smithsonian wanted the mummies even back then. So like 1890s. They wanted the mummies back then. They've always wanted the mummies. Mm-hmm. But to purchase them, he had to tell them the ingredients that he used in his embalming fluid. And he wouldn't tell them. He never told anybody. So that secret just kind of died with him. But really, the core process of making the mummies had more to do with his patented technique of creating like a drying chamber to dehydrate the mummies first. I'm not sure how much the fluid actually had to do with it.
Uh-huh.
And there were pretty clear diagrams available of like this chamber that he patented to put the body in. But we just talk about this mysterious jar of fluid that can't be identified. So, so his techniques were pretty important for starting the process of how do we preserve bodies that need to take a long trip, or families that live really far away that aren't going to be able to make it to the funeral within 12 hours of him dying. Um, so they're medically important specimens.
Right.
And at the time, there was nothing illegal about him procuring them. They were unclaimed bodies. They were available. Uh, the state was surprisingly chill about him wanting to experiment on dead bodies. You wouldn't think they would be so down for that, but they really didn't seem to care. And obviously, his technique was very effective because the mummies are very well preserved.
Mm-hmm.
But it is sad to know that I believe it was confirmed at one point that one of the mummies did pass away from tuberculosis. Um, Another one may have died in childbirth. I don't know, or she at least had just had a baby. I would have to look at that information again. I have a pile of papers that had been collected over the years by the museum that they just like have a stack that they'll give you if they can find it and you ask for it. And it has that kind of stuff in there, but a lot of it is like third-hand knowledge, so it's hard to know how accurate a lot of it is. Yeah, the mummies are a touchy subject right now, so kind of the consensus with Gen Z is like when they're just kind of suddenly hit with, so this is what the mummies are, they're like, oh, well, that seems kind of cruel and gross, and the mummies shouldn't exist. We should get rid of the mummies. And that's where I kind of start to butt heads with younger generations a little bit, because I do think it's a little more complicated than that. And especially as a woman and as a West Virginian who has yet to have a positive experience with the healthcare system at large, let alone mental health services, I it's kind of a gray zone for me, because on the one hand, these women did not consent to being medically experimented on. And that's an important conversation to have, for sure. And but at the same time, and I know we've talked about this, my personal belief is, as unfortunate as these women's circumstances were, I believe that if they were to go away, and as easy as it is for people to just forget history, even the most recent past, that if you were not there to physically stand in front of them and hear what happened to them and confront your feelings about what happened to these women in real time, I don't think it would hit the same if you were just reading it passively in a book.
Right.
These women deserve to be looked at in their eyeball sockets. And while you hear the awful things that probably happened to them.
So, before we fully do wrap up, I want to do the very short segment of the rapid fire questions. I just have 3. So you can just say whatever first comes to mind, and then we'll just
I
move to
usually do.
that next question. So if you're ready for those, we can do the rapid fire questions.
Absolutely.
So question one is pretty easy. Where is your favorite spot in West Virginia?
So right now it's the swing, where they've been putting up, like West Virginia Tourism's been putting up those big swings. They put one next to the covered bridge.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you get to look.
Nice.
It's designed that you're supposed to like face the bypass, so the covered bridge is behind you when you're taking a picture. And it's like, no, I get on a swing for sport. Like this is a full body workout, and we're looking at the covered bridge while we do it.
All right. Question two is, if you were a cryptid, how would people describe you?
Hmm, that's a hard one. Um, a menace.
Uh, the menace of Barbour County.
The menace
What
of
is
Barbour County is lives in the woods. Always smells like mint chocolate, and will you don't see them, but you'll just hear somebody whispering, "That's actually not true." That's
That actually does sound really menacing. Like,
like you're just in a city council meeting, and you just smell like mint chocolate wafting through the air, and then somebody says some bullshit, and then you just hear, that's not
oh my gosh. Okay. Question three. In the spirit of Halloween, if you were doing Halloween karaoke, what Halloween themed song would you pick?
Dead Man's Party by Oingo Boingo. We don't even have to think about that one. It's always Oingo Boingo.
You had that one in the chamber ready. It was
Yeah.
just, I love it.
I have an Oingo Boingo song for any occasion, really.
So those were my only questions, and that does wrap up the episode. But before we go, do you have any lasting advice that you want to leave off on?
There's too much. There's too much. Join a union. Don't let your employer push you around. Don't let them make you feel afraid that you're going to lose your job, because goddamn, what do you got to lose at this point?
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and I
Yeah.
loved this conversation, and I cannot wait to see you in person again when I make my way up to Philippi. But if you need any help with anything in the meantime, or just anything, let me know, and I'd be glad to help. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, keep supporting local, stay curious, and remember to celebrate the quirky treasures in your own community. Be kind, keep exploring, and don't be a stranger.